What's up, guys? Just a Gamer here, back with another review of a deck. Today we're using a different form of mid-range hunter. I added the Lich King, which I think is very good in mid-range hunter, and I also added the Death Knight. Kind of just switch it up from the average aggro face hunter. This deck is very viable. I used it last season towards the end from rank about 10 to 4, and I had a 70% win rate. So I think it's pretty viable, and it's also pretty cheap. Obviously the Lich King and the Deathstalker Rexxar are legends, which make it a little more pricey, but everything else is overall pretty much a common card that you'd have at the start of your deck. So this deck is very good due to the fact that you can have the mid-range slash good opener with Hunter, where you can put out a 1-drop, then move into the Crackling Razormaw 2-drop on your 1-drop, and then 3-drop Animal Companion or Eaglehorn Bow, and you can just completely blow them out in that aspect, as the regular Hunter always does. You just blow them out from the start with a great opener where they can't contain it, and you just win off of face and your hero power dealing 2 to the face. Or you can always just use the Lich King and the control-y type cards that I added in the deck to when it's going down to more mid-range and more late game, you could still win the game. Because the problem with normal mid-range hunter is if they have things to deal with your early game, like they have a Doomsayer or they just have board clear after board clear, if you can't get anything to stick on board and they can recover if it's by turn 6 and you don't have something on board and you don't have a Highmane, you're gonna lose 9 times out of 10, since you just don't have anything on board, which is what Hunter is basically about. You need to have things on board to win as Hunter, or you'd have to have them at a very low health just to keep hero powering them, and even that is still not viable because most decks run a good amount of heal nowadays. So the inclusion of the Lich King and Deathstalker Rexxar just make it so if it does go late game, you can win pretty easily. The Lich King, obviously 8/8, hard to deal with. If they do deal with it, you still get a generated card, which is always so good. The Frostmourne or any of the generated cards from the Lich King, it just makes it such a good thing. It just makes it such a good card to have in the deck, and it also just makes them use one more type of removal on it that they won't be using on another priority target like Highmane. Instead of using the Shadow Ward Death on Highmane, they use it on the Lich King. You have your Highmane 6 on the board even easier. So things like that make it better. Also, it's really good with Stitch Tracker. Stitch Tracker is basically a 3-mana 2/2 and discover a Lich King or a Highmane or a Bonemare. So basically you get 2 Lich Kings in your deck, or 3 if you can draw both Stitch Trackers before you draw your Lich King. So basically this deck just generates extreme amounts of value with Lich King and Stitch Tracker, or with Bonemares. Bonemares, obviously, if you've played in this meta, you know how important of a card that is and how great of a card that is. So if you can have 4 Bonemares in one match, it's so hard for the opponent to deal with that value with a 5/5 and then adding 4/4 to one of your minions that are already on board. It's just really hard to deal with. So that's why this deck is just so good. You can blow out a lot of control type decks right off the beginning if they don't have board clear, and then if they do have board clear, you can make them waste all the removal on your Lich Kings and you still get the generated cards from the Lich King. And then you also have your Death Knight, which is just so good in late game. Late game, every single turn, 2 mana, you build an insane beast. You can build a Flappy Bird with charge and hit them for 8 in the face and then go stealth. Or you can literally build so many overpowered minions that late game no one can really value you either, unless they're Quest Mage. Quest Mage is like the only deck that can really outvalue this, and they have to just draw perfectly to deal with your early and mid range. And in late game, you obviously can keep producing as many threats as you can, but eventually they're just going to draw their combo and one turn kill you. But other than that, there's no really bad matchups against this deck. This deck, if you can draw a good opener, you 9 times out of 10 are going to win, since they have to waste so much on your opener because they think you're just a normal mid-range hunter. So since they think you're a normal mid-range hunter, they waste all their resources on your early 1/2 drops. They waste all your resources on your Highmane, but they don't know that you still have a Lich King coming, you still have double Bonemare coming, you still have, they also sometimes, especially against Evolve Shaman, they'll flood the boards with Fireflies and 1-drops and 2-drops, and they don't know that you have the Deathstalker Rexxar coming that will just clear their whole board, which is why this deck is so good. The deck is already good just with the base value of the cards and how good the cards are individually, but it's also just the surprise factor that most mid-range hunter decks aren't like this, so they aren't ready and they're wasting all their resources on the wrong types of cards instead of wasting their resources on the Lich King. They're not aware that you're running this type of deck, and they're just trying to clear as much as they can off the board so that you don't hit them in the face for as much as you can. But then when they wasted all their Shadow Word deaths on your Highmanes or your Cobalt Scalebanes, and then you drop that Lich King and they have no way of dealing with it, that's how you really win the game. When they're not prepared for your other threats that usually aren't in this deck, but with this version they are, and they can't just deal with it, that's how you win the game. Which is why I think this deck's so overpowered. No one's really running this list, so no one really knows how to play around it and knows what to be prepared for, so you can just always blow your opponents out with just the surprise factor. So I would definitely recommend this deck. I wouldn't recommend this deck if you don't have the Lich King or the Death Knight, because these are very important cards. But everything else in this deck is basically a common card or a card given to you off the Hunter class right when you start the game. So if you can craft the Lich King, which I think is a pretty good card in the game, and most people should have it because it's in a good amount of decks, then I would craft it. And the Death Knight for Hunter class, it's not the best Death Knight, so if you don't have a bunch of dust or you didn't pack it, I wouldn't recommend crafting that Death Knight. But if you do have extra dust, the card is still good and it's viable, and I feel like they're trying very hard to make Control Hunter better and better in the coming patches and the coming expansions. So I feel like eventually the Death Knight for Hunter is going to be very, very good when Hunter overall does become more of a control-y class, which is what they're trying to do with the expansions. So you never know, maybe in the future this card will be very viable, but right now, if you do have the dust, I'd suggest crafting the Lich King, but I don't know about the Death Knight for the Hunter, but this still is a viable deck. It's probably tier 2, I would say. Tier 2, yeah, I think tier 2 is fair. It's obviously mid-range Hunter is like tier 3. I feel like this is just a step above mid-range Hunter, since it still has the mid-rangey feel and the aggro feel, but you could still outvalue some late game and mid-range decks that would normally beat you if you were just aggro Hunter. So I would recommend this deck. This deck is very good. I'd say it's about a 4 out of 5 stars. It's fun, it's new, it switches up the meta, and it's not too costly. So if you have the dust, I'd try it out, and I hope you guys enjoyed this deck review. Thanks.